Howdy everybody, Mr. Bob, your neighborhood naturalist, Bob Langston from the North Carolina Zoo, coming to you this afternoon. Well, I have on my high visibility shirt, so that must mean we're out on a road trip today. Came out for a drive because I was looking for something I wanted to show you. As a very young child, one of the things that always stuck with me was my dad, when he would drive us on outings with the family. Absolutely hated driving on the 4-lane highways. He always preferred to drive on country roads. And quite often I would see these things and I would wonder about them. I was a very curious young man, and so I would often look at things and go, I wonder. And I would see a tree like this one right here behind me, I'm trying to point, growing right along this fence line. As you can see, there's barbed wire fence right here. And I'm right on the edge of a pasture. Driving across country roads, we would see a lot of pastures. And I would see these trees, this one right here, see them growing on the side of the road, and I thought, oh wow, isn't that really cool? That guy is using a natural tree for a fence post. So the question then came up, which came first, the fence or the tree? And the truth is, it was the fence. These trees that grow right along here, this one in particular, is a tree that's known as an eastern red cedar. Now, cedars are typically European trees. Technically, this one is a juniper, but when English settlers first got here, they looked at it and it looked very similar, so they started calling it. The official name for this is Juniperus virginiana, or Virginia juniper. It has very, very fragrant wood. Some of you may be familiar with cedars as well. One of the interesting things about these is that they are what are called dioecious. That means there are male trees and female trees. The males produce pollen. The females actually produce cones. Now, these are not cones like you would normally think of as a pine cone. Pine cones, especially from a longleaf pine, are enormous. They're this big around and things. This is the cone right here from one of these cedar trees. I'm going to pluck one and take a step forward and see if you can see that. It's this itty bitty little berry right here. And that's kind of how these trees get here. The berries are food for a lot of different birds especially. And birds will fly around, they'll land on the fence over here, they'll lift their tail, they'll poop, and they'll drop the still growing part of this seed. It's gone through their digestive tract, it lands on the ground in some nitrogen-rich fertilizer, and here it grows. So that's how these fence post trees end up getting here. Now, cedars have a lot of other values. I'll show you some smaller ones here in just a moment, but these things grow quite easily. They grow in sand, they grow in clay. The cool thing about them, they're actually tolerant of salt water, so they grow up along the coast. They're actually very, very beneficial trees. So there's a great relationship. The trees need birds to help spread the seeds. Birds, in this case, one of their role is called an agent of dispersal. They're carrying the seeds from place to place to place. In this case, it's the berries. So that's one of the benefits. It's a benefit to the bird because the birds are able to eat these, and the outer part of it they can actually get some nutritional value from as well. So that's one of the benefits. I'll tell you a little bit more in just a few minutes about how they benefit us and other folks, well, other organisms as well. So stick with me. Let's take another little ride. We're going to go around and see what else we can find about eastern red cedars. Be right back. Okay, I showed you what the great big tree looked like behind me there a few minutes ago, but here are a couple of smaller ones. These are probably maybe 3, maybe 4 years old. They were planted here most likely by a bird who's dropped the berries and the seeds in their poop, or their guano if we want to call it properly. When they're little like this, the leaves are very spiky. I worked with some young people one time that called them stabby, which is kind of a good word. But these are the smaller ones that grow here, and we're still along this pasture out here in the countryside. I'll show you how they come up in my yard in just a couple of minutes, because in some cases I let them grow. I'll explain what that means in a few minutes too. But these are the small ones. These are the eastern red cedars growing up right along this fence line. Now what's interesting is there's a fence post right over there, and the fence post itself is actually made from cedar wood. The wood itself has a lot of sap and resin in it, and it makes it very, very resistant to both moisture and to insects. So I'll tell you how that works in our favor as people in just a couple of minutes. Howdy everybody, we're back in the backyard, and I'm going to show you two things here. One is a little trick that we naturalists like to use. When we get photographs sometimes of things out in the woods or out in nature, we like to have something for a scale. So this is the reason why my keys are sitting here, so you get an idea for how small and how tiny this little tree is. And this is actually a red cedar. Very, very early, much smaller than the ones you saw a little while ago. This one is probably about 2 years old, and it's gotten run over by the mower at least once. I often say that my backyard is not a well-groomed monoculture, single set of plants. It's kind of a meadow, and I let things grow up sometimes just because I want them there. I'll show you one in just a second. When these first get started, you'll notice the leaves and the needles, as we call them. These are very, very sharp and spiky. And if you get a little close, they will stab you. They can leave a little sort of a very, very mild prick in your skin, just a little thin thing. It's not super pleasant. It's not super unpleasant, but that's just one of the things. So when these are small, their leaves are very, very spiky. They're very sort of sharp. But this one was probably planted by a bird flying from over that way somewhere. About a year or two, they just flew over and left a little patch of guano, and here we have a red cedar coming up. You get an idea for the size with my keys. I'll show you another one here as we go in just a second. Welcome back, my friends. This one is one of my absolutely most favorite currant plants in the backyard. I say currant because they do change quite a bit. This is one of the cedars that came up probably, this one's about 6 years old. It came up as a little itty bitty sprout, and I had to come out here and put some orange stakes to keep from running over them with the lawnmower. But I have one here, there are a couple of more behind me, and a couple over there. I kind of like my backyard to be a little bit sort of a natural meadow, if you wish. So I don't plant grass seed, I just let whatever comes up come up. So the red cedars, once they get to be about this size, the needles aren't quite as spiky and they don't stab you so much. You notice it has this nice shape, and my parents often told me that in the South, this was the traditional Southern Christmas tree when they were growing up. And part of it was that there weren't a lot of commercial Christmas tree growers at the time. This was around World War II period. So they pretty much had to go out and find something that was growing naturally. And these come up, as you see, quite easily. As I mentioned a little while ago, they can grow in sand, they can grow in clay, they can grow in any type of soil pretty much all across the state of North Carolina. Another neat story about these trees, they do get quite big. They can get 60 or so feet tall, and they can have trunks this big around. And so they were a quite valuable source of lumber for lots of things. Historically, women in the South, I know this sounds sexist, but it was often a gift, a wedding gift. You were given a cedar chest. And it was a big trunk that was made out of cedar wood. And because of the resin I mentioned a little while ago that makes them resistant to insects and also to water damage, they would repel moths. And so it was a great way to keep woolen clothing and various other things that could get eaten by moths if they got into your house and other insects. So the cedar wood has a real advantage that way. Cedar wood, when it gets to be larger, is often used for roofing shingles. They're called shakes now, but in the days when they used to be known as shingles. Now there's an interesting relationship between those of us at the zoo now and long ago. I don't mean at the zoo, I just mean people long ago. There's a part of North Carolina, if you were to get on Highway 64 here in Asheboro and drive east out towards the ocean, you can go as far as on 64, it'll get you to within, maybe 100 yards of the ocean when it ends. Along the way, you'll cross the Alligator River as you pass from Terrell County into Dare County. And as you get into the mainland part of Dare County, that whole place is very, very swampy. Back in the late 1800s, a company out of Buffalo, New York came in, and their main mission was to log the cedar trees and the bald cypress trees that are growing in mainland Dare County. They established a place in the late 1880s that was known as Buffalo City, North Carolina. Jump ahead, after most of the original cedar juniper, cedar, and cypress were taken out of that area, the area was pretty much abandoned after World War II. There were a few people still living there. There are some drainage pathways out there, and the locals, I have a friend who grew up in Mans Harbor that often called them shingle ditches. And what would happen, it was easier to take the equipment out into the woods, make the shingles, tie them up in a big bundle, and then float them on the water and take a pole, and you'd push them out to where you could get them onto a barge or a boat to get them to market where they could be sold. And there are a couple of places out in that part of the state that are referred to as Shingle Landing. Elizabeth City, I think, had that nickname for a while, and there are other places as well. So that area had been logged out, and then it was abandoned, pretty much left on its own, ultimately deeded to the federal government about 1974, 1976 or thereabouts. That's what's now known as the Alligator River National Wildlife Preserve. And so this area that's very swampy, where these red cedars grow and where they were supplied for roofing shingles and lumber, is now home to the only wild population of red wolves anywhere on the planet. The population is not large because they do have a relatively large range. It's one of the neat ways that these trees, or their habitat, is habitat for other animals that are highly endangered. Red cedars, not endangered at all. They grow wild. Some people even call them weeds, simply because they come up so easily. You saw what the one looks like here in the yard. So that's one of the interesting stories, red cedars. We get advantage out of them. We can use them for lumber and various other products, roofing shingles. It makes some really pretty siding because the wood has two different colors. The heartwood is typically kind of a dark brown or even a red color, and on the outside edge, that wood is typically much lighter. I have a friend whose father built her a canoe out of this nice cedar wood. Kind of cool stuff. Red cedars. They can be natural fence posts because that's where the birds plant them. They indicate to us that the birds are doing their job as agents of dispersal. They tell a story, and that's part of what we look at when we study natural history. Mention again that the zoo is open to the public. Please visit our website at www.nczoo.org. You can buy your advance tickets and make your gate reservations at that point, and you can see all the guidelines and recommendations we have. So for the North Carolina Zoo, I'm Bob Langston, Mr. Bob, your neighborhood naturalist. Thank you for letting me join you for a while today. You guys be safe, and I will see you again next time. Thank you. Take care.